What we've seen is that thousands of fighters from around the world, including hundreds from the West, have traveled to Syria, and many of them have joined with established terrorist groups in Syria. And this raises our concern that radicalized individuals with extremist contacts and battlefield experience could return to their home countries to commit violence at their own initiative or participate in al-Qaeda-directed plots aimed at Western targets outside of Syria.
Well, that was the head of the National Counterterrorism Center a couple of months ago up on Capitol Hill. Now a new report, and part of that has been confirmed by Fox News. The Daily Beast writes this: the latest U.S. intelligence estimates that more than 100 Americans have joined the jihad in Syria to fight alongside Sunni terrorists there. Senior American intelligence officials tell the Daily Beast that they believe between 6 and 12 Americans who have gone to Syria to fight Assad have now returned to America. Quote, "We know where some are," one senior U.S. intelligence official told the Daily Beast. "The concern is the scale of the problem we are dealing with. We will start in Syria." In a big day in foreign policy, let's bring in our panel. Syndicated columnist George Will, Juan Williams, columnist with The Hill, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. George, your thoughts about Syria and policy there?
Well, Syria is a training ground, and it's sort of their Camp Lejeune or Quantico to train officers and fighters, and it clearly works. It makes you wonder whether it should still be U.S. policy that Assad has to go, because it gives you some clarity about the kind of people who are going to win if Assad loses. And it could be, although it sounds callous to say so, it could be in our interest for this to simmer along as possible so that some of these people who went there to fight die there fighting.
Michael O'Hanlon with the Brookings Institution says our policy has not worked. Many people are saying that on all sides, Juan. As you take a look at the death toll, there are 162,000 deaths, believes, in Syria since this began, 10,000 in less than 2 months, and about 54,000 civilians, 8,600 children. Those are staggering numbers.
It is staggering numbers, and again, the policy obviously has not. The thought was on the part of the administration that they could get Bashar al-Assad out within a matter of weeks, and that was years ago at this point. What we're seeing, though, now with these people who are going there to fight, it just hammers home the point. We don't know who the rebels are, who the opposition is, and for the longest time we've wanted to support the ouster of Bashar al-Assad, but we're unsure about who we're supporting. Well, now this, Senator McCain, Senator Graham have all said we should be arming the opposition. We should be more involved. Well, why would we want to arm these jihadists? These are people who are enemies of America. So the question then becomes, how do we get involved? What is the effective strategy? And at this point, it looks like it's the opposition is going haywire. They don't have any political direction except terrorism.
The opposition, the head of the opposition, or one part of it, met at the White House, and the president dropped into that meeting just the other day, last week. You wonder how that conversation went. But Charles, your thoughts?
Well, I think we promised them what we've been promising them for years, and which we have not delivered. And I'm sure they walked out happy, and they will be disappointed. They will not get anything if these are the non-jihadi rebels. Look, we don't want to rewrite history here. The jihadis were not around at the beginning of this revolt. There was an opposition we could have easily supported with weapons and training. And remember, what turned the civil war around is not that Assad is such a great leader. It's not that his people love him. It's the fact that Iran and Russia poured in weapons. Iran was able to mobilize Hezbollah, who are Lebanese, not Syrians, who were the fighters on the ground, the shock troops. Iran was able to bring in its Revolutionary Guards, and now there are reports it has brought in Afghans to fight on behalf of Assad. This is not a war he won on his own. This is a war he won by default, because it was like the Spanish Civil War, an international conflict, except that only one side showed up, the Russian-Iranian side, and our side never showed up. At this point, we can still identify non-jihadi opposition and support them to at least have a larger say when the fighting stops.
Meantime, tonight, the breaking news at the top of the show: twin car bombs in Nigeria killing, and the death tolls rising, at least 118 right now. George, over the weekend, the head of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Dianne Feinstein, said this about al-Qaeda, and here's the State Department response.
We just went through the opening of the 9/11 museum. I know they will come after us if they can. I see the intelligence. Terror is not down in the world. It is up. Both deaths, injuries in many, many different places. Al-Qaeda has metastasized.
Well, core Al-Qaeda has been decimated. We've been concerned about affiliates or the growth of some of those around the world.
But does Secretary Kerry share the views of the FBI director and Senator Feinstein?
He hasn't spoken to it in that capacity, so I'll leave it at what the Secretary has said about it.
George.
I don't understand the distinction they make incessantly between core Al-Qaeda and the other Al-Qaeda. I think Senator Feinstein's views would have been really interesting in October 2012. We can't assume that all this metastasizing, as she says, of Al-Qaeda has occurred since the presidential election, which was run by her party on the premise that Al-Qaeda is on the run. Now we've redesignated the survivors as core Al-Qaeda and exempted them from this, but the fact is that the premise of the president's campaign and foreign policy is now shredded.
George, let me help you quickly and say that core Al-Qaeda attacked us on 9/11. It's a big difference between that group and the group that is, as you describe it, metastasizing. There's a spread of kind of Islamic extreme ideology in the world, especially among populations of in poor areas like Yemen and the others, and people who are looking for a reason to engage in revolution and pick up on this extreme ideology.
Well, thank you for helping me with that, and go on and elaborate on how it is we distinguish core from non-core Al-Qaeda.
Well, I just told you. I think it's the people who attacked us. It's going back to bin Laden and that organization that was directly responsible for killing Americans.
Oh, so we're in good shape.
No, I didn't say that. It's very clear, and I don't know why some people on the right decide that they have to conflate the two. Clearly, we have an obligation to fight terror wherever it rears its head and threatens us. But there is a difference between a threat that's potential and one that was actual.
Well, somebody made those bombs go off in Nigeria.
Correct.
Somebody's training those Americans and Europeans in Syria, and whether they're technically core or not core, they're still a threat.
That's why I say we have an obligation. I think that's what we're seeing, and especially as we've just been describing the situation in Syria, we have an interest in that fight.
We have a president whose last major foreign policy address had one major theme. This war must end, meaning the war on terror. It must end because it has really corrosive effects on the country. It's got to end. All wars have to end. As if we can unilaterally end the war if the other guy won't agree to do it. We have a president who, as we just saw with his State Department spokesman, always trying to downplay the threat which is out there. And then we're surprised that there's no domestic support for a robust opposition against terror and against opposition elsewhere. There's a president who wants us to live in a peaceful world, who wants us to live in a world where people no longer act like 19th century men, like the Russians, and no longer act like barbarians, like the guys who just exploded the bombs in Nigeria. Unfortunately, we live in a world where these people exist, and the role of a president is to lead the nation in recognizing the threat, mobilizing support to oppose it. He's done precisely the opposite. Psychologically, he demobilized the country.